Prynawn da a croeso cynnes. Good afternoon and a really warm welcome to the Public Health Network Cymru's webinar series. My name is Sarah Jennings and I'm a director of Natural Resources Wales, cyfroedder Cyfoeth Naturiol Cymru. And I'm just here to be your facilitator and host this afternoon. We've got a really exciting lunchtime session for you. And it's all about climate change. Before I start, though, I just wanted to say that I may be with NRW now, but I spent the last decade with Hywel Dda University Health Board and the previous decade with a local authority in West Wales, and so have a lot of experience and lots of connections with Public Health Wales practitioners, consultants, and was involved in setting in sort of some of the early drafting of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So I'm so delighted to be able to be invited to host today, because I'm passionate about how we work with partners, how we really deliver the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and how all of the elements, whether that's climate, nature, well-being, health, illness, are all connected, and actually what the role of climate change and nature emergencies are to health. So it's really topical. Climate change is the greatest global health threatening the world in the 21st century, and it affects many of the social and environmental determinants of health: clean air, safe drinking water, sufficient food, and secure shelter. And as we're in the penultimate day of the COP26, and earlier this year had COP15 on the nature emergency, we've also recently on Thursday, at the end of October, Thursday the 28th of October, the Net Zero Wales carbon budget was published, and that's about a decade of action to tackle the climate crisis and achieve net zero. And then we're also really in that whole conversation about how a green and just recovery and a transition from the pandemic and the ongoing actions to tackle climate change are linked. What we've seen is the most vulnerable are invariably the most impacted. We don't want to leave people behind. We want to bring everyone forward together, not putting the cost of the change to those most vulnerable. And we must ensure that we address the underlying socio-economic inequalities and inequities. So I'm really delighted to introduce our presenters. So first in this webinar, we'll hear from Jonathan Tench. Jonathan is the Partnerships and Networks Changemaker in the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, and is responsible for supporting the Commissioner's international and private sector engagement. So Jonathan has over 12 years experience in public-private partnerships in global food systems and sustainable development. And he has previously worked for Oxfam, Unilever, and was head of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition USA in Washington, DC for 2 years, before moving home to Wales. So croeso nôl, welcome back, Jonathan. Jonathan is going to give us an overview of what Wales is doing at a national level, highlighting some of the positive actions in Wales and showcasing how local projects are playing their part in tackling climate change. And then we're going to hear from Nerys Edmonds. So Nerys works for the Wales Health Impact Assessment Support Unit in Public Health Wales, and she started her career as a mental health nurse, and since 2000 has worked in public health with a focus on promoting mental health and well-being, addressing health inequalities and health impact assessments. She's got a special interest in the role of the natural environment and well-being, and has also carried out health impact assessments and mental well-being impact assessments on environmental programmes. So she'll give us an overview of the climate change health impact assessment, which is due to be published at the end of the year, and explain the role of Public Health Wales and exploring that health and well-being impacts that we need to address in order to respond and plan for climate change. So we're just about to start, but housekeeping, couple of things. After the presentations, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions. So please use the Q&A box at the panel at the top of the screen to type in your questions throughout the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Public Health Network Cymru's website after this session. English and Welsh subtitles are available, and they can be switched on using the button at the bottom right of your screens. However, we are aware that the Welsh auto-generated subtitles are sometimes a bit inaccurate. We're hoping that that system will get better. And if you experience any difficulties with the technology, please let us know through the question and answer box, and the team can contact directly. So let's get underway and hand over to Jonathan. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Jonathan.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. And as if I didn't feel like I had imposter syndrome enough this afternoon, your extensive background, Sarah, in how public bodies in Wales are actually implementing the Act is really fantastic. And then Nerys, your expertise on climate change itself is going to be fantastic to hear. So it won't surprise everyone that our climate experts in the Future Generations Commissioners team are up in Glasgow at the moment, flying the flag for Wales and talking about lots of really interesting things around kind of the Welsh experience and getting all of that. So I am afraid that you have got me as a sort of generalist in the office. So bear with me, I'm just going to load up my slides. So here we go, 1 second. So prynhawn da everyone, I'm just getting, yeah, here we go. Great, so I've got about kind of 10-15 minutes with you all, and what I wanted to do is just do a quick reminder of how, in terms of the Welsh perspective on climate change, we are framing things in Wales around the Future Generations Act. So a quick little reminder of that, a bit of an overview of how we're seeing in the Commissioner's Office some of the progress at national level around climate change, a few examples of some fantastic climate action, particularly from public bodies, around climate change, and then a few reflections from our office initially to the Welsh Government net zero plan, so how we're going to get to a net zero Wales by 2050, and then a few of the kind of future challenges that we are picking up as an office that we think the public sector and others need to be looking at in terms of getting to net zero. Many of you will be familiar with this Act, setting up the 7 wellbeing goals, putting a legal duty on policymakers in public bodies to act in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And clearly climate change is that fundamental thing that we're all looking at the moment in light of COP26 about what kind of world are we handing over to future generations. The Act as well established an independent commissioner, Sophie Howe, who I work for, and the role of our office is to advise, monitor progress by the public bodies on the Act. A bit of an architecture overview here. Of the Act, the 7 goals, the national indicators. There is an ongoing conversation with the Welsh Government right now around those indicators and setting milestones for them. And then the Welsh Government also developed the Future Trends report. Then when it comes to actually implementing the Act and the wellbeing goals, and there are many ways in which health and climate change fit into those goals that you can see at the top of the screen. There is a duty on public bodies, but then there is also, excitingly, I think, in Wales, and a great thing about our innovation in governance is the collective duty by public service boards. And actually, Nerys and I were exchanging before this conversation that Nerys, the next wellbeing assessments by public service boards will be in advance of next year's local elections. And there will be the public service boards, of which health boards and other public bodies are part of at that regional level setup, will be conducting consultations around that. And we will expect to see a lot of development in the thinking and the interpretation of public bodies of the Welsh Government Net Zero Plan in the development of the wellbeing assessments for the public service board. So that will be coming up, and I'm sure many people on the call will be part of that. I'm also sure many of you are aware of the 5 ways of working and then the accountability setup behind the Act as well. Please do get in touch with our office if you've got any questions around the Act. So where are we? We feel like in the office that there has been a lot of progress at national level around getting very serious about the climate emergency. And we have seen a lot of progress when we look at the net zero plan that was recently launched. Where we are seeing really bright spots is around the national switch away from road to public transport and active travel at that kind of high level. Wales's record in terms of recycling and now a zero waste strategy as well. We're seeing great things emerge there. And we are seeing an increase in decarbonisation spend by the public sector. Many of you will be kind of familiar with what's been going on in transport at the moment. We are very big fans of the fact that if we keep building more roads, there are just going to be more vehicles on them. So we fully support the Welsh Government plan around a moratorium on road building. And what you can see in the top corner there is what is called the sustainable transport hierarchy. So if you think about before the Act came along, the way that we did transport policy was putting motor vehicles at the top of what we were going to do on transport, and now look at that flip there. So the top priority is, are we making sure that our transport infrastructure is based around walking and cycling? I'm going to move quite quickly on. There is a fantastic project supporting Uganda in the development of tree planting there as a demonstration of Wales's global responsibility. Really quickly, some ways that local health boards are interpreting the Act. Cardiff and Vale University Health Board are recognising the importance of green spaces for patient care. We absolutely love this example, and we are seeing more and more public bodies look at that. Gwent Climate Action, I think I may have, got the title of that wrong, but the public service boards in Gwent, I think it's Gwent Ready Climate, have been developing climate assemblies and also have developed a lot of projects around electric vehicle infrastructure, which we are very big fans of. Ysbyty Gwynedd, fantastic to see over 80 NHS staff come together and develop a green strategy for the hospital, which includes, very excitingly for us in the office, this desire to look at local renewable energy and also food self-sufficiency and working very closely with local farmers around local food procurement. Cardiff Council, this is a fantastic example of the Act being in action, where we saw the council, and I know this example is a few years old now, but what we really like about it is the secondment of public health officials to help develop transport strategy in Cardiff. And this kind of crossover of expertise between health and other areas around the Act we think is really so important. So some fantastic examples of local action. I am speeding up now, sorry, and I'm sure there'll be time to pick up in the Q&A. A few reflections from the Net Zero Wales plan, which was launched by the First Minister just a couple of weeks ago. So it's exciting to see that the Act is used to frame the plan, that the Welsh Government has thought through the 5 ways of working of the Act in the development of this climate change strategy. Great to see carbon reduction at the core of future city growth deals, also in terms of building regulations, the support for locally owned energy developments, and the emphasis on the circular economy, with the switch of even elements of Welsh Government business support now going towards encouraging business to do more around sustainability. Things that we think are missing. This is something the Commissioner likes to talk about a lot when it comes to climate action, which is the link between making progress on reducing our carbon footprint with the other goals of the Future Generations Act. So a few of the things that we would like to see a bit more of in the Net Zero plan, more linkages to the Race Equality Action Plan. We would also like to see more thought going into assessing the carbon impact of budget decisions. We would like to see more reflection on the need for us to look at the big money at the top of the system, think about how we're going to get to divesting public sector pensions away from the fossil fuel sector. And again, while we really welcome the tree planting, people and restoration initiative, we do think when you look at the jobs of the future in green industries, or when you look at the jobs in the nature service, and I know Sarah will have lots of thoughts on this, I'm sure, we need to look at our women and our people from, for example, Black, Asian, minority ethnic background, getting these opportunities and feeling like they can access the skills and these jobs when we look at kind of, you know, the opportunities of protecting nature and reaching net zero in terms of job creation for the new industries and skills around it. I don't have time to talk about these other challenges, but really quickly, we are working on this idea of a national nature service with many of the partners on the call today to look at this issue of how do we increase jobs in nature conservation and look at how the skills and the jobs can go to parts of Wales that maybe don't get those opportunities. Lots of progress on gas boilers in Wales, and we have a whole team kind of looking at some of these issues here, which I can get into. And really quickly, a recent joint Public Health Wales Future Generations Commission report on climate change and inequality, and how are we going to look at areas like Treforest and in Pontypridd, where communities with suffering from many kind of inequality issues are also now having to combating the increased problem of flooding. And this report looks into some of those details around the risk of climate change in Wales, increasing inequality issues. There are many resources available on our website. We will be sharing this PowerPoint with you. I'm sorry, I feel like I think kind of 15 minutes kind of just about did it, but happy to answer any more questions. I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And that was a canter through what was full of depth and breadth. And I've just taken a couple of points before we head to Nerys, but I think just reminding us about the individual duties of our organisations, but those collective ones, and how that provides the Act provides that context and that duty for us to do this, but also those examples of where it's being done well. So I've got some questions for you as well if we drive from questions afterwards, but also what we welcome. So we've had some big announcements. The news is full of, is this going far enough or isn't it? I love the fact that you've drawn out what we welcome about these things, but what's missing, and challenged us and challenged, hopefully we're putting challenge out there into the Welsh public sector of what more we could do. And that third element, which is close to my heart as well, about having just spent a lot of time actually in Treforest and Treherbert and Pentre, how we don't shortchange communities, how communities can be empowered to take forward, perhaps being the pioneers in some of the areas of deprivation, to actually empower them to make the most of things, so that they're not bearing the costs of climate change, which is predominantly flooding in those valleys. And that we actually have a much more equal approach. So thank you, Jonathan. Loads to think about. Start getting your questions formulated for when Jonathan and Nerys can answer them at the end. So now just straight away to Nerys, who's going to introduce the climate change health impact analysis.
Hi, I don't know if I'm coming through on the camera. I think I'm live. Oh, there I am. Okay, lovely. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to the network for inviting me to talk about the health impact assessment that myself and Liz Green from the Wales Health Impact Assessment Support Unit have been leading. We actually started this work in 2018, and it has been delayed by the pandemic due to other roles that we've been undertaking, but we're actually absolutely determined to get it published probably early in the new year now. Now, the aim of the impact assessment is to look at the potential health and well-being impacts of climate change in Wales, looking at physical, mental and social and environmental impacts. And what we really wanted to achieve was to look at how is this going to affect people's lives, where they live, work and play, and what does it mean for people's lives. Our ambition for the HIA is that it provides evidence that can inform and promote integration and prioritisation of health and well-being into adaptation planning, and that it will support organisations across Wales with planning for climate change. And it's also aimed to inform Public Health Wales's own work programme and long-term strategy around climate change. And just picking up on Jonathan's mention of the wellbeing assessments, in the review of the first round of wellbeing impact assessments, Alan Netherwood and his colleagues felt that there was a lack of interpretation of the impact of climate change, particularly how it might impact on vulnerable groups and communities, and that kind of localised impact on wellbeing was underexplored really. And again, I think one of my ambitions for the HIA is that it can help inform that next round of assessing local wellbeing and planning for the future for communities in Wales. Just a quick overview of the HIA. It's looking at Wales, it's looking at negative and positive impacts. We're looking through the lens of the social determinants of health. We've gathered a wide range of evidence, including a literature review, interview, stakeholder workshops, and 2 really interesting case studies. So that's the work that's underway. We've got a multi-sector advisory group that's been overseeing the process. Because our report isn't out yet, we decided to publish and some infographics last week to coincide with the COP meeting to really highlight some of our key findings and to begin to communicate and provide a resource really for other people to use to highlight the health impacts of climate change. So this is what I'm going to base my talk on today. And the first one up there in the top left corner is around how nature supports our health and well-being. And it's really highlighting that, you know, the Earth, the planet, is our life support system. It supports our health and well-being. And that's both from being in, you know, enjoying and getting the benefits of being in beautiful green and blue natural spaces and biodiverse environments. But it's also what we've kind of framed here in this infographic as the essentials for life, or is sometimes called ecosystem services, are clean air, clean water, food, which are absolutely fundamental to our health and well-being. And also summarised on this infographic are the different ways that being in green and natural environments benefit our physical well-being through physical activity, our mental well-being through peaceful places, appreciating beauty, and also our social well-being. Our natural spaces are often areas that we go to enjoy with other people, or we undertake activities with others, or we share an appreciation, or we care for a park or an allotment, or, you know, we do things with other people in natural spaces as well, and that benefits our well-being. So this infographic is wanting to promote that, but also promote individual actions that we can all take to care for the planet. Now moving on, this slide summarises the climate projections from the Met Office that were the updated projections in 2018, and it's highlighting changes for Wales. Now on that infographic, the blue line refers to a low emission scenario and the red line is the high emission scenario. And really the key message from this infographic is that our summers are going to get hotter and drier. And you can see that it might surprise you actually, but you know, we could end up with a scenario of water scarcity in Wales by 2070 in the summers. But our winters are going to be warmer and wetter, and this is where that links into those risks around flooding and also things like landslides. And our winters will also become warmer. Now that could be a benefit for health because it can reduce cold weather deaths. Down at the bottom there, increased heat. There's a projection that by mid-century, hot summers could become much more common. Around 50% of the time, we could get a very hot summer. And sea level rise, which is obviously a major concern for communities in Wales. You can see there by 2050, we could see a 28 centimetre rise, and by 2080, it could be up to 76 centimetres. That's a real worry for areas in Wales in terms of what does that mean for different places. What does that increased heat mean for the places where we spend our days, our schools, our workplaces, hospitals, care homes? So these projections are what drives the identification of health impacts. And we know that a wide range of population groups, the whole population will be impacted by climate change, but within the health impact assessment, we're also trying to explore impacts on groups who will be particularly affected. And as Jonathan's already mentioned, that there is a concern about widening inequalities in the face of climate change as well. So our second infographic is really trying to highlight how different groups can be affected, how their health and well-being is affected. Again, this doesn't reflect all of our findings. We've had to be selective in the infographics of what we've presented. There will be more in the final report. But just to highlight, in terms of children, experiencing flooding is very stressful for children, particularly if they have to be displaced from their home. They may be taken out of the area where their friends are, their usual activities, their schools. They may be in temporary accommodation for quite long periods of time. And their family will be placed under a lot of stress and strain, which will affect them as well. We know that young people are anxious about the future, and that young people are very aware of climate change issues, and we need to be mindful about how this is affecting their mental well-being. Children are also at higher risk of heat-related illness. And that needs to be a consideration in every setting where children are, in schools, in sports clubs. Moving on to older adults. Again, older adults, mental health impacts of flooding also for anybody affected by flooding, but they're more vulnerable in emergency situations as well. And they might get disrupted, their support network could get disrupted by flooding. Older adults are at higher risk of heat-related illness, and they also, in periods of heat waves, they may choose to stay at home more, and that could add to social isolation. So that needs to be a consideration for people working with older adults. People on low incomes, there's a lot of evidence about people having less access to insurance, and that becoming a major stress for people. And obviously, we've heard our colleagues already mention concerns about more disadvantaged communities being affected by flooding. Food costs could also go up as a result of climate change, and that's a concern for people on low income. We've already seen a rise in food poverty due to the pandemic. And then people with long-term health conditions and disabilities, again, can be very vulnerable in a flooding scenario. Increased heat can impact directly on some health conditions and make it more difficult, or can exacerbate people's symptoms. It can affect some medications as well. And we've also highlighted across there that all of these groups are more vulnerable or more exposed to changes in air quality as well. So when we're planning for climate change, we really do need to think about different groups in our population. Where do they spend their time? What services do they need access to? And how are we planning to make sure their health is protected? The third infographic focuses on the impacts of increased heat. And I've also already mentioned a few areas linked to this, but this year's climate risk assessment really said that this has to be a top priority for the next 2 years. We have not got enough cross-sector action at the moment on increased heat. And what we've highlighted in this infographic is the impacts across different places where people spend their time. So for the first time, the climate change risk assessment for the UK highlighted schools and educational settings at risk of climate change and highlighted heat. And the parliamentary inquiry into heat waves highlighted that teachers are reporting that hot weather is affecting children's ability to learn in school. And there's a key study from England showing that school-aged children were more at risk of heat-related illness in a heat wave. Workplaces also need to think about this. Heat reduces productivity, so there's a major economic issue as well. It can also decrease safety in areas where people are using machinery. And some workers are more at risk of heat-related illness, so outdoor workers, for example. Now, homes is a really big issue because a lot of the homes, and this is where we've got to look at that interaction between decarbonisation and health and well-being, because where we've had a lot of action to insulate and create homes that are more airtight, that is actually locking in potential heat risk for the future. So I know that there is a review of building regulation underway that does particularly look at the need for ventilation. We've got to be really careful that when we're building very highly energy efficient homes, that we don't create homes that are going to overheat in the future. So we need more action to address heat. People involved in schools, hospitals, care homes, workplaces, building homes need to consider how is their setting functioning and what's the impact on health when we get excess hot weather. And just to highlight, our Public Health Wales Environmental Health team do have extreme weather advice on their website that's available. So within the health impact assessment, we've identified that all of the social determinants of health are impacted. I haven't got time to go through all of this today, but I just want to highlight the wide range of areas that we're considering in the health impact assessment. The last infographic is focused on access to healthy food, and again, you know, many of my public health colleagues, food, diet, nutrition absolutely underpin a preventative approach to health and well-being. And we've got some major issues already in our population around obesity, where nutrition is an absolute essential part of a more preventative approach. But climate change is going to interact with our food system. It can disrupt, extreme weather can disrupt food production and supply both in the UK and abroad, leading to food price spikes and supply issues. We've got projected increased risk of pests and species that could affect crop yields. Poorer soil quality and less water will also impact on crop yields. So there's more action is needed to develop a resilient food system in Wales. It has to involve people across sectors, but it's really important because nutrition is such an important part of public health as well. The other area that we want to highlight, and we'll be highlighting in health impact assessment, is what we're calling contextual factors and mediators of impact. And these include decision making, so how decisions are made about climate change and action, how the population perceives risk, but also how we adapt as a society, recognising that this is a huge psychological and social change. Social media and communications are very important, and also sustainable development. Now, the bit I just want to pick up today is around how decision-making processes also impact health. So it isn't just climate change, the kind of weather pattern change that impacts on health. It's also about how we as a society respond and how decisions are made. So there's some really important learning that's happened in Wales, and this is learning for the international sphere as well, about how coastal risk management takes place and how some of the decision-making processes impact on health and well-being. So I've just highlighted 3 key insights that have come from this really important report. And the things I want to highlight are that keeping affected communities informed and enabling them to have a say in decisions, also affects the health outcomes of those people affected. And community impacts can become negative or positive depending on the degree to which communities become more or less cohesive. So we've really got to pay attention to the processes involved in adaptation planning, how decisions are made about flood defences or protecting communities, and we've got to build community resilience because that is essential to promoting and protecting the health and well-being of people as we experience climate change. I really recommend everybody read the summary for Wales of the climate change risk assessment. It's got very clear areas where more action is needed. Some of them I've mentioned today, but very, very important to inform yourself and your organisations on that. I want to finish with hope because it can be really overwhelming thinking about climate change. It's certainly quite overwhelming carrying out health impact assessment and trying to make sure that we cover all the issues. And I think for me, it's important to acknowledge that this is a really difficult area for everybody. It's very hard for us to absorb the enormity of it, to think about how we can take things forward positively. Personally, my own approach is that it's about working together, and that's how we will be successful in this. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. I had a few more slides, but I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Neris. That was absolutely fascinating, just like Jonathan's. I can't wait for this tool to come out. I think it'll be incredibly powerful because it will give us a tool to be able to assess and challenge. So that'll be amazing. And your different infographics I thought were great. I'm a single mum of an 8-year-old, and she's just been elected onto the Cyngereco, the Eco Council, and actually that idea of hope and challenge, so feeling a sense of urgency to do these things, but without feeling knocking a child or an adult's mental health, that it's not hopeless, we have hope. So I think that was really, really interesting. And that schools, workplaces and homes, and the challenges that are different, and flooding and homes that are ready for the future. And I think there is some really interesting opportunity with building regulations and the planning system to make very different change in Wales. So that will be interesting to see. I visited an eco home the other day, an affordable home that was ventilated for hot summers, insulated for cold winters. It was affordable housing. The bills were £8 a year on average for heating, cooling and hot water for a year. So just ponder on that. So that was interesting. And then that last element about actually how you react to these things is very much also down to how communities feel cohesive, whether they pull together or feel set apart. So I think really interesting food for thought for our questions. So I'm going to encourage people to put questions in. There's quite a lot of great statements. I can see that Christian put something in about the use of our pension funds, NHS, but it's all public sector pension funds. And Elizabeth was commenting about fast food outlets being built across Wales, and actually if councils didn't give permission for that, what impact would that have, especially in South Wales? I'm not sure it's limited, but certainly they're on every major trunk road in South Wales. So get your questions in, but in the meantime maybe I can start until there are some questions. Jonathan, I've got a question for you. I suppose you gave us the challenge of what we welcome and what's missing, so linking it to Neris's comment about hope. Do you feel hopeful, and what would make you feel even more hopeful? What that's missing that if we put right in Wales, or if those of us on this call could put attention to, would make a difference?
Great question, and Neris, your point really resonated with me. The Commissioner has started getting all of us in her office to really develop this mantra of Wales can do it. So Sarah, as you mentioned, and Neris, as you mentioned, the challenges feel so great, don't they? And yet, there are so many great things happening within Wales. I'll give you a snapshot of around 4 case studies of public bodies taking local action on climate change, but there are a huge amount more that I could have shared. So we've just been talking with actually the WLGA and unpicking actually some more case studies with some nice stats behind them, and I will be talking with the rest of our office about how we can accelerate some of our case studies around climate action, because I really do want to get across that while in the office, we often talk, of course, to younger people, future generations, about the challenges and that they're kind of facing and their aspirations for Wales to do better. It is really fantastic to see all these different pieces of work from the different kind of public bodies taking place. So I just really like this phrase that Sophie Howe has developed around Wales can do it. And I think we're always now going to be encouraging the public bodies to look at where there are great examples in the rest of Wales to kind of take that on. That does sound a bit waffly, doesn't it? But I think a lot is going to happen now in terms of the next wellbeing assessments by the public service boards and their interpretation of the Welsh Government net zero plan. So I'm quite excited actually about the innovation that will happen in Wales to kind of get us there. Also, if you don't mind, Sarah, I wanted to just pick up on a couple of things as well that kind of Neris mentioned. I think in particular around food. So maybe this answers a bit of your question, Sarah, on kind of like what we really want to kind of see happen next. And I didn't talk much about food in my presentation, but I think it's very interesting to see, you know, when we think about communicating to individuals what the impact of climate change would be and what the steps are that they can take, feels like there's this live debate in Wales at the moment, doesn't there, around should you eat meat? Where should that meat come from? Our Welsh Government climate change ministers are being challenged on this and are saying kind of lots of opinions about it, you know, seasonal vegetables, kind of what about those? So I think that is really quite an interesting debate to kind of watch, and what I'm sort of often picking up around this issue of food systems, as Neris was talking about, I think is not just thinking about fruit and vegetable consumption in terms of air miles, but also this linkage to healthy diets within Wales. Then it gets really complicated, doesn't it? Because we are asking our public bodies to come up with local food strategies that will improve access to healthy diets, particularly looking at things like increasing fruit and vegetable consumption in school meals, while at the same time we're saying, but also let's look at planetary health as well. But I think, certainly I think in our office we're picking up at the moment a lot of appetite, sorry for that use of that word, to have more conversations around food. And I think that is potentially quite an interesting area to look at in future. I'll stop there, sorry, very long answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. It's not a long answer. I think we could talk forever about these things. And I think you've given, you know, got a lot of food for thought there, excuse that pun. So we've got a couple of great questions in. So I'm going to ask Neris first and then Jonathan the same question. So Dave Wynn has asked, what would you say are the systemic changes we need to see in the next 5 to 10 years in Wales that would have the most impact? And whilst you ponder that, Jonathan, Neris gets to answer first.
Well, I think from perspective of, obviously the health impact assessment we've undertaken is focused on preparing for climate change, because climate change is with us. And I think the systemic changes we need to see are really that any organisation in Wales takes on board that, you know, climate change is relevant for them and they need to think about how it affects them, their organisation, the people that use their services or work in their services, so that people kind of become more, they feel like this is something that they need to act on, because I think at the moment it's felt quite distant. I think people are beginning to see, so the Welsh Government did a survey in the summer, and about 15% of people definitely thought it would affect where they live, and 42% thought it would affect where they live somewhat. What that gives you an indication of is that although people are beginning to realise this is actually going to affect them, but we've still got quite a way to go. So I think part of that system change is actually giving people the tools, the knowledge, to say, actually, climate change is happening now. We've all got a role in preparing for it. And certainly if you run an organisation, if you provide services, you need to think about how this is affecting your clients, your workforce, and also for communities to be supported, to think about what does this mean for our community. So I think that, for me, that is the major systemic change. I think the other area, I mean, there's lots, to be honest. There's the transport system, there's the food system, but I think we do need system change around food, and it's very challenging. I'm not going to underplay the challenges of that, because our food system is international. You know, it's very complex where our food comes from. But I think that is an area of systemic change that is needed.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I think from the Natural Resources Wales perspective, we're talking about tree planting, but obviously it's the right tree in the right place. And actually, if you're going to plant those trees on farmland, which are productive farmland that produce food that could stay in Wales or is used in Wales, there's a trade-off. And so I think that we're into the area of these trade-offs. So coming to terms with how we navigate through those is going to be really important. So Jonathan, you've had plenty of time now to think about what you think are the key systemic changes we need to see. Over to you.
Great, and I'll be shorter because I took so much time last time. I really would echo Neris's point around the food system. I do think looking at the development of an all Wales food system strategy would help us to have these conversations around our diets and planetary health. And I think that's really important, especially in the context of what Neris is talking about in terms of the future consequences of climate change. So food system strategy would be what we would be advocating for. And then a shout out for my colleague Eirgain Powell in our team, who is really an expert around decarbonisation of homes. And this really difficult issue, Sarah, you were talking about this as well, about a home you visited recently. And that is a fantastic example. We are seeing, though, we all know, the emissions that come from buildings is an issue we're going to have to really grapple with, and it's very expensive. So particularly with old housing stock in Wales, quite a high proportion of our housing stock is very old in Wales, and so thinking about taking out gas boilers and what we replace them with, we are going to have to get very innovative with how we're going to do that finance. So please do take a look at the Future Generations website, or get in touch with me, or you can find us. And we've been doing some thought into those innovative finance mechanisms within Wales to get there. We are encouraged by a lot of the thought that's gone into the net zero plan around this issue, but financing that is going to be really key, and coming up with that finance solution in the next few years so that we can see some really good action by 2030 on gas boilers would be really important. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. And we have a State of Natural Resources report, which is the data about what our natural resources are like in Wales. And you could be depressed by saying that 95% of our biodiversity has been lost in the last 100 years. But equally, that whole soil quality, what our food production could be like, and the food strategy, you can see how the climate and nature emergencies and how we live are all linked. So absolutely. So we've got another question now from Keris Priest. She says, this is a really complex puzzle to solve. So what actions do you think the panel think that we as individuals and communities could do to support positive change? So taking it from the governmental level and the policy level to the individuals in our homes, the 3 million people of Wales, what could we do? And I'm not going to give you the time this time, Jonathan. You go first, and then Neris next, and then I'll be conscious we'll probably need to wrap up unless there's a burning question left.
Oh, that's such a good question. Will I be able to give a good enough answer? I really am encouraged by not just the public sector action at local level on climate change, but the community group organisation. So it will not take you long to find out about your local green group in your area, whether that is around the repair cafes that Wales is getting really good at, or whether it is your local Friends of the Earth group, for example. So I would encourage you to think about the really great work that is going on. Oh, just as an example, Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, as they looked at the importance of investing in green spaces, invested in community engagement for that as well. So if you are part of a local, if you're part of a public body, I think there are some really good examples for you, not just in terms of what other public bodies are doing, but also then that linkage with community groups. And I think that's a really interesting emerging area, the involvement of local communities in local public body strategy. So we've got a colleague, Sandy Clubb, in our team. We would absolutely be able to kind of look at how we can connect you best with community groups in your area. So thanks.
Neris, your opportunity to say something.
Thank you. I'll just wait till the red There we are, I'm back on now, thanks. Well, it is interesting, Keris, and we had a lot of debate about this when we were putting together the infographics, because I think we can get kind of stuck in that, oh, it's too big for the individual, we mustn't put it on them, it has to be, you know, we're not going to solve this without mass action. And I think there is a balance there, because I think without the engagement of individuals and communities, we're not going to get there either. So I think, as ever, it's action at all levels of society that's needed. Actually, what we try to do with the infographic, so the one that's about nature and well-being, is we did select along the right-hand side of that infographic some actions that individuals and communities can do. So that included things like improving your energy efficiency at home. There's there's a link there to where you can find out more about improving energy efficiency. Active travel, try to walk or cycle rather than driving short distances. We've got information about making your garden more biodiverse, supporting wildlife. Join a community group, absolutely echo what Jonathan's saying. We've got such a thriving environmental sector. There's, you know, whether it's gardening or conservation work. So we've got a link there about finding out about volunteering, but also we've worked with Renew Wales within our health impact assessment, and we've got a link there. And there's fantastic examples of communities right across Wales taking action on climate change. So I think there's lots of ideas to get people going. There's various tools out there, and I can't remember the name of the best one off the top of my head, where you can actually look at, you know, most of our carbon footprint as individuals comes from our homes, heating our homes, and our transport. Those are the top two, basically. If you can do either of those, either use less energy in your house or use your car less for getting around, that's going to have a big impact. So yeah, hopefully we've put some actions there on that infographic, and we hope that will inspire some people.
Diolch, Nerys, thank you. And I think actually NRW will be with Welsh Government going out in the new year with a Natur i ni, nature and me, and us kind of engagement exercise, which is looking at the nature and climate emergencies, and we'll be asking people what they want to do locally, individually, community, and what they would press and urge government to do. So, but we are in a new space, aren't we? We're seeing young voices having real power to speak truth to power, whether we agree with them all or not, but they are having an impact. And COP26 will be judged on the court of public opinion, and it's being, you know, we've never had this much coverage for these issues before. So so it'll be interesting to see the movement that we can create with people who are passionate about this. But I loved your ideas. Thank you. For people can get involved locally, find out what's happening locally, and take individual action. That may be the way we save our mental health, that we don't have to solve the entire world global problem. We can do things locally. So last question here, great one from Catherine, which was mine. As we all know, and we're all tired coming out of it, the pandemic has shown that we can make changes quickly. We can have a rapid incident response, and we can change things quickly. Do you think we are changing quickly enough for the climate and nature emergency? And how can we unblock and scale up actions more quickly or quicker? Nerys first, and then Jonathan, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes, 2 minutes each. Sorry, 2 minutes each, really short.
Thank you for that question. We're not acting quickly enough, absolutely not. We've known about this for a long time. None of this is new. We're already late, so we're late. We have to get on with it much more quickly. How can we unblock and scale up actions? I think we have to treat it as an emergency. That's my own personal opinion. We have to treat it as an emergency in the same way that we treated COVID as an emergency, and it was an emergency. So I appreciate that is more difficult because maybe people feel like, oh, it's still 10 years away, but ultimately we, you know, from the IPCC report, we know that we have this decade to actually make a difference. by 2030, really. So we can't keep putting this off. So I believe we have to unblock, we have to treat it as the priority, the emergency.
Thank you. And Jonathan, your couple of minutes on how whether we're making changes quickly enough and how we treat this as a climate and nature emergencies with the same degree of urgency.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd echo everything that Nerys said there. I'm encouraged by, I think, the honesty and frankness of our climate change ministers in Wales around the scale of the challenge and recognising, are they acting fast enough? But there is still a huge amount of work to do. And you know, what I'm struck by, because we spend so much time in our office listening to the views of young people and future generations, I feel like if all of us do a better job of listening to younger people around climate change and plugging them in and guiding them to get more airtime, to be better plugged in with the political system, I think the better. I'm really encouraged. If you want to look at some hope and how there are advocates out there for that scale up that is needed. We've got the Youth Climate Ambassadors from Wales, which are led by Size of Wales, who've been up in COP26 doing really great advocacy work. The Commissioner's Office here, we run the Future Generations Leadership Academy for identifying future leaders in the Act. And I think actually both Public Health Wales and Natural Resources Wales are involved in that, and it's a great example of let's equip our young people and the future leaders to be able to scale this up and listen to them around the need to do that. So I'm encouraged by the strength of the advocacy coming from young people, and I think if more of us make the effort to listen to that very real anxiety that they are facing, that's important, and we plug that into the system. There are some conversations around how we can address young people's anxiety on climate change in the Senedd, so kind of watch this space. I think there'll be some developments there, but I think that will really help us force the issue of scale. Thanks.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Jonathan, thank you so much, both of you. And I think really good to end on that note of hope, that there is, I living with an 8-year-old who holds me to account on a daily basis, I do feel hopeful because I see her and her friends with a real passion for this. So they will hold us to account if we are in the hot seat for the next decade. But also, I know many of you are practitioners out there, but there's also hope for every family, every community that you work with, every school, every business, everything you do, that every contact counts. That has been the thread that runs through Public Health Wales. I think it can count for these messages as well as all the other messages that we've been sort of working with over the years. So it really remains for me just to say a huge thank you to both Jonathan Tench and Nerys Edmonds for giving up your time, sharing your expertise with us. It's been an absolute privilege to do that. And I think we'd be very grateful if everyone joining the webinar could complete a short evaluation. There's going to be a link that's, it was at the beginning of the chat, but it'll be sent to you. And also join the Public Health Network Cymru if you're not already a member. And finally, if you've got any ideas for future webinar topics, please let the team know at Public Health Wales Network Cymru. But diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd, thank you so much, and pob hwyl, and gobeithio gweld ti eto. I hope to see you again. Thank you.